Hello, everybody. We're back with part 2 of my grandma passed down her cabin to my brother and I. And if you guys want to read the rest of the story, it's by Born Beach. I do recommend it. He has a whole Reddit about it. It's probably going to be, I'm going to link it in the description. And also, if you guys want to watch part 1, I'm probably going to link it up here somewhere. And just go watch that part 1 if you haven't watched the first part. This is going to be the continuation of that story. So let's get right into it. I shook Eric from his fainting spell. He sat up groggily, rubbing the back of his head, where he'd knocked it against the hardwood. What happened? He muttered. How to say this? A lot. He blinked, his eyes scanned the room. Then he froze, his hand gripping my arm as he looked up at the man by the river, standing before us in his beige ball cap, checkered shirt, and dirty jeans. The wolf mask he wore reeked of decay, and his eyes glowed a faint yellow. It's nearly dark, the man said. Yeah, I know, I said irritably. You alright, Eric? I looked from the man back to me, his mind probably reeling. What's going on? He whispered. I shrugged. It was the truth. I had no idea what was going on. When the man had cornered me at the end of the hallway, I expected myself to be torn from limb to limb, maybe have my teeth made into a nice necklace. Instead, he just said it was nearly dark, and stood there expectantly. It took me a few moments before I realized he wasn't going to attack me, and that's when I awkwardly walked around him and came to check on Eric. I don't think he's gonna hurt us, I said. Not that I knew for sure, but I'd figured we'd survive this long, so we might be in the clear. Eric stood, steadied himself against me. He studied the man. What if he's warning us? What if he was warning us back then, too? The book flashed in my mind, The Mysteries of the Cryptids. Eric had packed it into one of Grandma's moving boxes, not even realizing it. If he is, then he probably wants us to read that book. I marched from the room, past the man, and tore open the box. I rifled through it. Finally, at the bottom, I found it. I picked it up and ran my fingers over its faded cover. The thing was in pretty bad shape, with some of the pages fused together from water damage during its river crossing. The illustration on the front was of a Sasquatch being strangled by a sea monster. Lovely. Is this what you want us to read? I asked the man. He didn't move, didn't speak. Let me guess, I said, crossing the room back to Eric. It's nearly dark. Don't be a dick, Eric muttered. He held out a hand for the book, and I passed it to him gladly. Out of the two of us, Eric was the academic. If there was a mystery to be solved in those pages, then he would be the one to do it. He flipped the book in his hands, scanning the text on the back and reading it aloud. A compendium of the greatest mysteries known to man. Cryptids have long fascinated the scientific community, though their existence is highly contested. There are 3 great tales, sure to frighten and entertain. He furrowed his brow, his eyes rescanning the text as if he might have missed something. A moment later, he shook his head. This just looks like an old monster novel. He stared at the man. Is this a prank? I mean, if it is, it's pretty good. How'd you know we were coming back up here? The man didn't speak. Eric looked at me and sighed. I guess we can read it? Sure, I said, plucking the book from his grip. We'll read it on the way down the mountain. I stuffed the book in my jacket pocket and made for the front door. The man stepped in front of me. It's nearly dark, he said. You're right, and that's our cue, Eric. Let's go. Eric looked at me in disbelief. Matt, this is practically what we've been waiting for. The answers are here, He gestured incredulously at the man. Here he is, and he isn't even trying to eat us or whatever. A chill ran through me, like the memory of the man. The memory of our first night was returning too, and I wasn't ready to face all that again. Talking was one thing, but this therapeutic walk down memory lane had grown a bit too real for my liking. Sound good? Eric stared at me with his stubborn defiance. If we had inherited anything from our late grandmother, it was our unfailing resistance to have our minds changed after they'd already been made up. Luckily for me, I was more stubborn by a mile, and Eric knew that. Sure enough, he folded his arms and looked sidelong to the window. All right, fine, he said. We'll leave tonight, but I'm not kidding about this. We do as you say, study that book, and then come back. I nodded, and I meant it. I hated this. Don't get me wrong. It scared me in all the wrong ways, but I've been through enough hours of therapy and dumped enough money into booze to know that if I didn't sort this shit out right now, then I'd either end up dead or bankrupt. I promise you we'll be back tomorrow. Eric waved me off. Sure, whatever, let's go. I let out a sigh of relief, thankful that Eric was much more reasonable than myself. We'll be back first thing tomorrow. I gave him an awkward half salute and moved to step past him, but then he grabbed me by the wrist. It's nearly dark, he said. I tried to pull my arm from his grasp, but his grip was ironclad. I get that. That's sort of why we want to get the hell out of here. I could feel my wrist bruising as his calloused hand squeezed. Get off of him, Eric shouted. grabbing the man's fingers and trying to pry them free. I brought my other hand around and did what I could to help, but it was like pulling apart a vice clamp. "It's nearly dark," the man growled, his voice now guttural and beast-like. "It's nearly dark." Something agonizing dug into my arm, and I realized claws were growing from his fingers, black and horrible, piercing my skin so that the blood ran down them. "Stop," I screamed, certain that at any moment my wrist would ground to dust. "Jesus Christ, please." The reek was overwhelming. I gagged, my body in sensory overload. With a violent jerk, I felt my wrist snap as he tossed me sideways. My nose collided against the wall with a dull crunch. Between my broken wrist and smashed nose, I could hardly think past the agonizing pain rioting through me, but I still found the will to fight. "Eric," he was sightseeing. "Matt," he muttered. "It's starting." I turned to the man, who was stood as still as ever. "It's dark," he growled. A thud sounded from the cabin's heavy door, then another. The timber of the entire structure shook, dust falling down from the rafters and whatever Uncle Jake had failed to take with him crashing to the floor. The front door exploded, flying across the vestibule and colliding against the far wall with a deafening crash. Something screeched, then stepped inside with a thunderous footfall. Eric and I ran so hard that my lungs felt like they'd caught fire. Exhausted, I fell to the dirt with a groan. The pain of my smashed face, broken wrist, and a lifetime of poor decisions had finally caught up with me. "I'm done," I breathed. Eric doubled back, crouching next to me. "Take it easy, man, look." He pointed ahead. "We're nearly to the river. Let's get you some water." So we were. Now that I was catching my breath, the rest of my senses seemed to sharpen again. I could hear the rushing current just barely through the wind. I pushed myself to my feet and the two of us made our way to the bank, where I dropped to my knees and slurped as much water as my mouth could hold. "Pass me the book," Eric said. I reached inside my jacket and handed it to him. Its pages rolling in the storm. He held it close, up to the light of the moon. "The entire time you've had this," he said, squinting at the cover, "and you never noticed the author?" I looked at him, wiping dribbles of water from my mouth. It's not like I've had it my whole life. I left it here when we went home. I really didn't need any mementos of the week. "Who wrote it?" "Grandma," he said incredulously. He turned the book toward me and jabbed his finger at the bottom text. "Gale, G, Fasturo." "Well, I'll be damned." "Don't sweat it," Eric said, shaking his head. I missed it on the first glance, too. He glanced around, no doubt scouting for a place free from wind, with enough moonlight to read by. Eventually he settled on a large boulder near the water, shielded from the storm by a gnarled fir tree. He clambered up it, with some effort. "Did you know she was a writer?" He called down to me. "Not at all," I said. "Come to think of it, I had no idea about anything Grandma did, besides come over every Christmas and bake apple tarts. Mom never talked about it." Eric flipped through the book, opened to the first page, and adjusted his glasses. "Mind keeping a lookout while I peruse this thing?" I nodded, rising from the riverbed and looking up and down the shore. No sign of the man, and no sign of the beast that destroyed the cabin either. So far so good. I hiked up the side of the bank, getting to a higher ground so I could better keep watch over the area. As I did, the book played in my mind. The mysteries of the cryptids. Why would Grandma write something like that anyway? She'd never so much as mentioned the Loch Ness Monster or abominable snowman growing up. And here she was, a supposed authority on them. Seemed bizarre to me, but then all of this did. Had she known about the man too? What about the beast? She must have. Something splashed in the river, and the hairs on my neck stood on end. I swallowed, my eyes searching up and down the running current, scanning every outcropped rock and a wayward branch. Just a fish, hopefully. Seconds turned into minutes, the only sound coming from the croak of river toads. Maybe I was making a bigger deal about things than I needed to. I closed my eyes and tried the breathing exercises my therapist recommended. Then another splash, this one closer and louder. I strained my vision. Even beneath the glow of the full moon, the river's dancing waves were difficult to keep track of. Light gleamed off of them at one moment, then died in the next. Small flickers caught my eye, but when I'd look, I'd only see dark water staring back at me. Was something swimming towards us? Eric flipped another page of the book nonchalantly, his expression thoughtful, eyebrows furrowed in a focus. Something felt wrong, though. It was the same feeling I'd had when I first came upon the man by the river, like my mind was picking up on things that I hadn't fully yet processed. "Eric," I called, taking a few steps on the stone shore. "Come away from the water." He looked up perplexed. "Why?" He adjusted his glasses and looked around, holding his hair against the wind. "Is something here?" Just get off the fucking rock, man. Come over to me. I glanced upward. The moon shone, pale and ominous, through the drifting clouds. There's plenty of light over here. I'm nearly finished. Just relax. Now, man. Groaning, he creased his page and closed the book, and slid down the big rock carefully. He steadied himself from the wet, clacking stones as he walked towards me. Fuck's sakes, Matt. Another splash. The day we met the man by the river, I said, the pain on my wrist fading against the backdrop of my mounting fear. I came back down to the water. What? Eric said, bracing himself against the roaring wind. I forgot the book. Jake brought us down fishing rods, remember? I was so excited that I'd forgotten all about mysteries. I lifted on the riverbed. I was transfixed by the river now. Something was in there, I knew it. When I came back down to get it, I saw something in the waves. Like a fish? Eric said, finally reaching me. He turned, following my gaze to the river, though he looked skeptical. I shook my head. Bigger, I think. I don't know. I just grabbed the book and ran. Another splash, this one near the shore. I backed up, nearly slipping on the stones. Behind us, the pitch black of the woods, and in front of us, whatever lurked in the water. You hear that? I said. Eric nodded, stashing the book in his pocket. After what happened earlier, I say we don't take any chances. Let's find somewhere safer to read. Where, though? The woods? We'd get lost. And there's no question of that. Back to the cabin, or whatever was left of it? No point. The car was totaled. Besides, whatever beast had come knocking didn't sound nearly as reasonable as the man. Probably still around. No, we were resigned to the river. We just need to be careful and stay away as far from the shore as we could. Good Lord, said a voice nearby. I jumped, my arm flying in front of Eric instinctively. You boys have really worked yourselves up, haven't you? I wheeled around to see a familiar face standing at the height of the riverbank, a stone in his hand. He hurled it and it landed in the water with a heavy splash. Uncle Jake, I shouted. He began walking down the bank, slowly with a sway in his step, like he'd been drinking. Good news, boys. He shot us a smile, but it felt wrong, horrible. His eyes were unfocused and his tongue lolled from his mouth. I just found Griff and he can't wait to see you. Uncle Jake ambled toward us, his pace irregular. One moment he moved slowly, the next frantically. His head seemed loose on his neck, rolling about with his momentum. I was so worried about you two, he said. Matt, Eric muttered. I held up my hand indicating for him to be quiet. I was uncomfortable about all of this too, and Jake didn't seem like himself. After everything else that happened tonight, I wasn't taking any chances with anybody, family or otherwise. But still, I needed to know what the situation was. I needed to hear him speak. My eyes darted around, taking stock of our surrounding. If it came to a fight, I wanted to be ready. There was always a river, and it's 2 against 1. Eric and I had a chance against our uncle, even with the busted wrist. I swiveled my gaze back to Jake. He was only a couple car lengths away from us now, and I could see him more clearly. His eyes were pale, milky, and faded, like he was drugged. His mess of dark hair shot out from all angles beneath his trucker hat. I'd never seen him in such a sorry state. Boys, he said, burping. I just need to talk to you for a second about Griff. He's just up ahead and he's scared of the water. He gestured toward the wood, swaying on the spot. Come see him. I didn't say anything. I knew that Griff was dead. I'd pulled his scorched skull out of the fireplace myself, and Eric had been there with me. Jake took a couple of frantic steps forward. I recoiled, putting myself in front of Eric. Call it older brother instincts. Call it stupidity. All I knew was that this cabin wasn't going to claim any more of my family. Aw, Jake said, stopping and tilting his head. Are you afraid? Another burp. Of me? What's going on here? I said quietly. I'm talking to my nephews, he chuckled, feet dancing to keep his balance. Come on, Matthew. Eric, let's go. Another step forward. Don't take another fucking step, I shouted. Stay the hell back. He paused, his demeanor changing, his face drooping, his sing-song smile replaced by a snarl, showing a row of yellowed teeth. You boys were supposed to join us a long time ago, but she got soft. What? No, she didn't, Eric said, stepping out from behind me. He took the book in his hands, holding it up to Jake. She realized how sick this whole thing was. She spared us. I had no idea what either of them was talking about, but Eric had clearly read something in Mysteries while up on that rock, and whatever he'd read, Jake knew about it too. Spared you? Jake spat. He took off his cap and chucked it to the side, the corner of his mouth twitching. At the cost of the rest of us, maybe? He took a shambling step forward, his eyes cold with menace. What makes you better than me? I knelt down using Eric's tall frame as cover from Jake's vision. My good hand found a decent-sized rock, and I clutched it, rising back to my feet and placing it in my jacket pocket discreetly. We're not better than you, Eric said, but that doesn't mean we deserve to become monsters either. Deserve to become monsters? What the hell did Eric read? You think I'm a fucking monster? Jake bellowed, eyes bulging. He slammed his finger to his chest. I'm a proud product of success, just like you should have been. My heart thundered. I didn't know this man anymore. Have you been drinking, Jake? I hoped the answer was yes. I needed something to make sense tonight. Drinking, Jake said, his wild cataract eyes looking from me to my brother. You ain't told him yet, have you, Eric? Didn't invite him to your book club. What's he talking about? Eric swallowed. He's talking about mysteries. No shit, I said, getting impatient. What about it? Help me the fuck out here, man. No, I'm sorry, he said, shaking his head. When it came down to Eric, anxiety came down hard. The book's written like an autobiography, Matt. I thought it was a stupid pulp novel Grandma wrote, but it's like research notes, man. Research notes. Jake took another half step forward and my hand tightened around the stone. Stay back, I'm not kidding. He smiled. Come on, Matt, I've never hurt you before, have I? Yeah, research notes, Eric stuttered. I didn't think much of it, honestly. Thought it was just part of the book gimmick, but seeing Jake like this... Jake hunched his back, hands pumping in and out of fists. Like what, Eric? He growled. Don't talk to him, asshole, I said. Jake was bigger than me by about half, and in his current state, more unpredictable by a mile. If he came at me, I'd have one shot to clock him with the stone. Talk to me. Talk to you, he said, cocking his head. But you're so boring, Matt. All you've ever done is bitch, complain, and mope. His eyes drifted behind me at Eric. Your brother's always been the interesting one. Now he's even gone and figured out my mother's secret. Eric, I said, I really need you to get me up to speed. The book, man, it's... English, man, what about the book? I kept an eye on Jake, my hands gripping the stone, so hard that I could feel my palm cramping. Grandma wasn't some writer documenting cryptids, Matt. He brandished the paperback, then snapped it open, flipping through it aggressively, till he heard it stop on a page. He thrust it in my face. I pulled my head back and squinted. The ink had faded from years of aging, not to mention the water damage from the river crossing. The left page looked like a list of ingredients, with pencil markings over the print. Beside them a set of tiny bulleted instructions. On the right was a diagram, too complex for me to properly make out given the condition of the book. Wait, what? She wasn't looking for cryptids, Matt, Eric said breathlessly. She was making them.